Clara Whitmore dragged herself through the dirt, blood soaking through her dress. One hand pressed hard against the bullet wound in her thigh. Behind her, the stagecoach burned. Bodies lay in the dust. People she'd spoken to just an hour ago. She couldn't scream. She couldn't cry. She could only crawl. When the hoofbeats came, she pulled the revolver from beneath her skirt and pointed it at the rider with trembling hands. The man wore a badge. He knelt slowly and said, "Ma'am, if I meant to finish you, you'd already be dead." She whispered, "It hurts too much." He answered, "That's why I'm here." If you want to know how this woman's pain became her greatest strength, subscribe, stay until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The revolver shook in Clara Whitmore's hands like a living thing. She couldn't hold it steady. The blood running down her left thigh had soaked through her travel dress, pooled in the dust beneath her, and turned the dry Montana earth into dark mud. Her corset pressed against cracked ribs. Every breath was a knife between her bones. The man on the bay horse didn't move. He sat in the saddle with his hands visible, open palms, no weapon drawn. A tin star caught the last of the sun on his chest. His face was weathered, lined deep around the eyes. The kind of face that had seen things it never talked about. "Ma'am," he said again, slow and deliberate. "You point that Colt at me much longer, your arm's going to give out before your nerve does." Clara's jaw clenched. "Then ride on." "Can't do that." "I said ride on." He stepped down from the horse, slow, one boot, then the other. He kept his hands where she could see them and walked toward her like a man approaching a wounded animal. No sudden movements, no false kindness. "You got a bullet in that leg," he said, his voice low, almost tired. "I can see the entry wound from here. You ain't stitched it, you ain't packed it. You're losing blood faster than you think, and in about 20 minutes, you won't have the strength to pull that trigger even if you wanted to." Clara's arm trembled. Her vision blurred at the edges. She blinked hard. "How do I know you're not one of them?" He stopped. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not offense, something older, something heavier. "One of who?" "The men who did this," her voice cracked. She tilted her head toward the burning stagecoach behind her, the bodies scattered in the road. "The men who killed everyone on that coach and left me to crawl." The sheriff looked past her. His jaw tightened. He stood very still for a long moment, and when he spoke, the tiredness in his voice had turned into something harder. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. They wore bandanas. The leader had a scar across his left eye." He smiled the whole time. Caleb Mercer's hands curled into fists at his sides. He knew that scar. He knew that smile, but he said nothing about it. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he said. "I'm the sheriff of Bitter Creek. That's 11 miles east of here. I've been tracking rider dust since noon." He crouched down, still 3 feet away, still careful. "You can shoot me, or you can let me stop that bleeding. But you gotta decide now, because we're running out of daylight, and you're running out of time." Clara stared at him. Her arm was shaking so badly now that the barrel of the revolver dipped and swayed. Tears streaked through the dust on her face. But she wasn't crying. Not the way people cry when they're sad. She was crying the way people cry when they're so tired of being afraid that the fear itself becomes a kind of grief. She lowered the gun. It dropped into the dirt beside her. "Don't let me die out here," she whispered. "Not like this. Not in the middle of nowhere." Caleb moved fast. He pulled the bandana from his neck, folded it tight, and pressed it hard against the wound in her thigh. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound that scattered birds from the cottonwood above them. "Hold it," he said. "Press down, hard as you can." "I can't." "You can. You crawled 200 yards with a bullet in your leg. You can hold a bandage. She pressed. Her teeth ground together. Blood seeped between her fingers. He lifted her onto the horse. She nearly passed out, but he held her steady, one arm around her waist, the other holding the reins. The bay horse moved carefully, as if it understood. Clara leaned against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the leather vest. Steady, even, reliable, like a clock that never stopped. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "My cabin, 1.5 miles. "You live alone?" "I do." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that by choice?" He didn't answer right away. The horse picked its way through tall grass and sagebrush, hooves soft on the trail. Evening insects sang in the warm air. "It is now," he said. The cabin was small, but solid. Hewn logs, a stone fireplace, a single window that faced west. A table, 2 chairs. One was pushed back like someone had stood up from it in a hurry a long time ago, and no one had moved it since. Caleb laid her on the bed, his bed, the only one. He set a lantern on the table, rolled up his sleeves, and pulled a leather kit from beneath the floorboards. Clara watched him lay out the tools: forceps, a thin blade, thread, a needle curved like a fishhook, a bottle of whiskey, half empty. "You've done this before," she said. "I was a cavalry medic, before I was a sheriff, before I was anything." He uncorked the whiskey and held it out to her. "Drink." She took 2 long swallows. The fire in her throat almost distracted her from the fire in her leg. "I need to dig the bullet out," he said. "It's lodged against the bone. I can feel the ridge of it through the skin." "I know." He looked at her. "You know?" "I worked for a physician in Boston, Dr. Edmund Hale. I was his assistant for 3 years. I've seen bullets removed before." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe respect. He handed her the leather belt from the table. "Bite down." She put the belt between her teeth. He poured whiskey over the wound. Her back arched off the bed, and a muffled scream tore through the leather. Sweat broke out across her forehead. Her hands gripped the sheet so hard her knuckles turned white. Caleb worked fast. The forceps went in. She felt the metal scrape against bone, a sensation so deep and wrong that her vision went black at the edges. "Stay with me," he said. "Clara, stay with me." She heard him, but from far away, like a voice calling across water. The bullet came out with a wet, grinding sound. He held it up, a flattened piece of lead, dark with blood. "Got it!" She spat out the belt. Her chest heaved. Tears ran from the corners of her eyes into her hair. "Now stitch it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Before I lose my nerve." He stitched it. 12 sutures. She didn't scream again, but her whole body shook with the effort of holding still. When he tied off the last stitch, she let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside her for years. Caleb washed his hands in the basin. The water turned pink. "You're tougher than most men I've patched up," he said quietly. "Don't flatter me." "I ain't flattering. I'm stating a fact." She turned her head on the pillow and looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time without fear clouding her vision. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. His hair was dark, shot through with early gray at the temples. His eyes were the color of creek water in autumn, brown and green, and something sadder beneath both. "Why do you live alone, Sheriff?" He dried his hands on a cloth, slowly, like he was deciding whether to answer. "Because the people I lived for are gone." The words hung in the cabin like smoke. Clara didn't push. She understood that kind of silence. It was the silence of a wound that hadn't been stitched, one that still bled quietly on the inside, where no one could see. 3 days passed. Fever came on the second night. Clara burned so hot that Caleb soaked rags in creek water and laid them across her forehead every hour. She talked in her sleep. Fragments of words, names he didn't recognize, pleas to people who weren't there. "Don't leave me on the road," she whispered once, thrashing against the sheets. "Please, I can still walk. I can still walk." He sat beside her and held the cool rag to her face. "You ain't on any road," he said. "You're safe. You hear me? You're safe." By the third morning, the fever broke. She opened her eyes and found him asleep in the chair beside the bed, his chin on his chest, his hand still resting near hers on the edge of the mattress. His fingers were rough, scarred across the knuckles, but they had been gentle with her. She remembered that, even through the delirium. His hands had been steady and careful. She didn't wake him. She lay there and listened to him breathe, and thought about how strange it was to feel safe in a stranger's home, in the middle of a territory where men had tried to kill her 3 days ago. When he woke, he found her watching him. "You sat up all night," she said. "Fever was bad." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "Then why?" He rubbed his face with one hand, stood up, poured coffee from the pot on the stove, black and bitter. "Because I've watched somebody die when I couldn't do nothing about it," he said, his back to her. "I ain't doing that again." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. The recognition of someone who carried the same kind of weight. "Who did you lose?" she asked. He set the coffee down. His hand rested on the edge of the table, and she watched his fingers press into the wood like he was holding himself steady. "My wife, Sarah, and my boy, Daniel. He was 4. The cabin went so quiet she could hear the creek outside. "Robbery on the Bozeman Trail," he continued. 3 years ago this August. I was 2 hours behind them. Rode in to find the wagon burned. Found Sarah in the road. Daniel in the grass." His voice didn't break. It was worse than breaking. It was the voice of a man who had told this story to himself so many times that the words had worn smooth, like river stones. The grief wasn't in the telling. It was in the spaces between the words. Clara pushed herself up against the headboard. The movement sent pain through her leg, but she didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Not the way people say it to fill silence, but the way someone says it when they've seen enough death to know that words are small and useless, but they're all you've got. He nodded once, didn't look at her. "The men who attacked my stagecoach," Clara said. "The leader, the one with the scar. He took things from the bodies. A watch, a ring, a locket." Caleb turned around. "What did you say?" "He took a locket, gold, oval-shaped. He opened it, looked at the picture inside, and laughed. Then he put it in his coat pocket." Caleb's face changed. It was subtle, a tightening around the jaw, a stillness in the eyes that hadn't been there a moment before. His hand moved to the edge of the table, and his knuckles went white. "Did you see the picture?" "No, I was too far away. I was hiding beneath the coach." He stood there for a long time. The coffee cooled, untouched on the table. "His name is Elias Crow," Clara said. "I heard one of the others call him that. He gave orders like a general, calm, precise. He told them where to aim. He told them who to kill first." "I know who Elias Crow is." "Then you know he's not going to stop." Caleb looked at her. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw something behind the grief and the discipline and the quiet control. She saw rage. Not the wild, burning kind. The deep kind. The kind that lives in a man's bones and never fully sleeps. "No," he said. "He ain't gonna stop." He knows I survived, Sheriff. One of his men came back to check. I saw him ride up to the coach, look at the bodies, and ride away. He counted. He knows one is missing. Caleb crossed to the window. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the long grass and the distant line of mountains. Then he'll come looking. Yes. And he'll find this cabin eventually.
Everyone in Bitter Creek knows where I live.
Clara pulled herself to the edge of the bed. Her leg burned, but she planted her feet on the floor and stood. Unsteady. Pale, but standing. "Then teach me to shoot," she said. He turned around. "You got a bullet wound 3 days old." "I have a revolver, a steady hand when I'm not bleeding to death, and a man coming to kill me. I don't have time to heal properly, Sheriff. I have time to prepare." He studied her. This small, fierce woman standing barefoot on his cabin floor. Her face pale as paper, her jaw set like iron. She should have been dead. She should have been weeping. She should have been begging him to put her on a horse east and forget she ever existed. Instead, she was asking him to teach her to fight. "Tomorrow," he said, "when you can stand for more than a minute without swaying." "Fine." She sat back down. The effort had cost her more than she showed, but she kept her face still. "Tomorrow." He poured her coffee, set it on the table beside the bed. "You're a stubborn woman, Clara Whitmore." "You say that like it's a flaw." "In my experience, stubbornness keeps people alive about as often as it gets them killed." She picked up the coffee, took a sip, looked at him over the rim. "Then I guess we'll find out which one I am." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his mouth, but she saw it in his eyes. A flicker of something that might have been warmth, buried deep beneath years of keeping the world at arm's length. He sat down in the chair across from her. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every face, every voice, every detail you can remember. If Crow is coming, I need to know what we're dealing with." Clara set the coffee down. She folded her hands in her lap, and she began to talk. She told him about the stagecoach leaving Helena, about the 6 passengers, a banker, a widow, a young couple heading to Oregon, and an old prospector who talked too much and laughed too loud. She told him about the dust cloud on the horizon, about how the driver whipped the horses, but it was already too late. She told him about the riders coming in from both sides, about the first shot that killed the driver, about the second shot that hit the banker in the chest, about the young wife screaming and her husband trying to shield her with his body. She told him about Crow stepping down from his horse like a man arriving at a Sunday social, calm, smiling, about the way he walked through the wreckage, checking each body, taking what he wanted. He enjoyed it, Clara said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "That's what I keep seeing when I close my eyes. Not the blood, not the screaming. His face. He enjoyed every second of it." Caleb listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word like a man memorizing a map before a long journey into hostile country. When she finished, the cabin was dark. The lantern burned low. "How many men does he ride with?" Caleb asked. "6 that I counted, maybe more." "Armed?" "Rifles and pistols. The one on the left flank had a shotgun, sawed off." "You noticed that while hiding under a burning coach?" "I notice things, Sheriff. It's what kept me alive." He nodded slowly. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been tracking Crow for 2 years. He hits the trails between Helena and Virginia City. Never the same spot twice. Never leaves witnesses." He paused. "Until you." "Lucky me." "I mean it. You're the first person who survived one of his raids, And can I? That makes you the most important person in this territory right now. Clara looked at him. It also makes me the most dangerous person to be around. I know that too. Then why are you helping me? He was quiet for a moment. The lantern flames swayed. Shadows moved across the walls.
Because 3 years ago, somebody should have been there for Sarah and Daniel. Nobody was. I was 2 hours too late. I will carry that until they put me in the ground. He looked at her. I ain't gonna be too late again.
Clara held his gaze. In that moment, something passed between them. Not romance, not attraction, not any of the simple things people name when two wounded souls sit across from each other in a dark room. It was recognition. The understanding that they were both broken in the same places, and that maybe, broken things could still be useful. All right, Sheriff, she said. Then we do this together. Together. She reached out her hand. He took it. His grip was firm but careful, like a man holding something he'd forgotten could be fragile. Outside, the Montana night pressed against the cabin walls. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other across the empty miles. The summer stars burned overhead, indifferent and vast. And 11 miles east, in the town of Bitter Creek, a stranger rode in at midnight. He didn't stop at the saloon. He didn't stable his horse. He rode straight to the telegraph office, broke the lock, and sent a single message. The woman is alive. She's with the sheriff. The reply came 20 minutes later, from a relay station near the border. Find her. End it. No witnesses this time. The stranger folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and rode back into the dark. Crow was already moving. The first shot missed the fence post by 2 feet. Clara cursed under her breath and steadied the revolver with both hands. Her thigh throbbed where the stitches pulled, and sweat rolled down her temples in the morning heat. She cocked the hammer again. "You're jerking the trigger," Caleb said from behind her. "Squeeze it. Slow. Like you're closing a fist around something you don't want to break." She fired again. The bullet clipped the top of the post and sent a splinter spinning into the air. Better. Better isn't good enough. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Better doesn't stop a man like Crow. Caleb walked forward and stood beside her. He didn't take the gun. He didn't adjust her stance the way most men would, grabbing her shoulders, tilting her hips, making a show of correction. He just stood there. "You're aiming at the post," he said. "That's the point." "No. You're aiming at the whole post. Pick a spot. A nail head. A knot in the wood. A crack. Make the world small. Everything else disappears." Clara raised the revolver again. She found a dark knot in the center of the post. She let her breath out slow. She squeezed. The bullet hit 2 inches left of the knot. Caleb nodded. "Now do it again, and again, and again, until your hand knows it before your head does." She fired until the cylinder was empty. Reloaded, fired again. Her palm ached, her fingers cramped. The wound in her thigh sent pain shooting up through her hip with every shift of weight. But she didn't sit down. She didn't ask to stop. After an hour, she was hitting within 4 inches of her mark every time. "You learn fast," Caleb said. "I don't have a choice." He looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he'd been doing more often since the night she'd told him about the stagecoach. Like he was trying to figure out how someone so beaten down could still stand so straight. "No," he said quietly. "I reckon you don't." They walked back to the cabin in silence. Clara's limp was less pronounced now, but every step still cost her something. She'd learned to hide it. She'd learned to keep her face still when the pain flared, to breathe through it, the way she'd watched patients do in Dr. Hale's office back in Boston. Inside, Caleb set water to boil and pulled a folded map from the shelf above the fireplace. He spread it across the table, anchoring the corners with a coffee cup, a bullet, and his badge. "Crow works a pattern," he said. "Helena to Virginia City. He hits the trail at different points, but he always circles back to the same territory. Here." He tapped a spot on the map. "Old silver mine, abandoned since '72. The shafts go deep. Good cover. Hard to approach from any direction without being seen." Clara leaned over the map. Her eyes moved carefully, tracing the lines, the elevation marks, the creek paths. "You've known where he operates and you haven't gone after him?" "I've gone after him 3 times. First time, he was already gone. Second time, I rode into an ambush and took a bullet in the shoulder. Third time," he paused, his jaw tightened. "Third time, I found a deputy I'd sent ahead hanging from a tree." Clara's stomach turned. "He left him there for you to find." With a note pinned to his chest, said, "Send another one." She straightened up. "And nobody helps? No marshal? No territory authority?" "I've sent word, written letters, ridden to Helena twice. The territory's big, Clara, bigger than you think. There ain't enough law to cover it. The marshals are stretched thin, and Crow's smart enough to hit where nobody's looking. So he just keeps killing. Until somebody stops him, yes." Clara stared at the map. Her finger traced the trail from the ambush site to the silver mine. 22 miles of rough country, ridges, ravines, dry creek beds. "What about the south approach?" she asked. "Through this draw here. If the main trail is watched." Caleb looked at where she was pointing. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You read maps?" "Dr. Hale was a field surgeon in the war. He taught me cartography along with wound care. Said a woman who could read a map and stitch a wound was more useful than half the officers he'd served under." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not surprise anymore. Recognition. The same look he'd given her the night she'd told him about the stagecoach. Like he kept expecting her to be one thing, and she kept turning out to be another. "The south draw would work," he said slowly. "Narrow, though. Single file. If they spotted you coming, then you'd need a distraction on the main trail. Split their attention." He stared at her. "You're planning an assault on an outlaw camp, and you've been walking for 4 days?" "I'm planning to survive, Sheriff. There's a difference." He folded his arms across his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said something she didn't expect. "You remind me of her." Clara went still. Of Sarah? Not how she looked, how she thought. Sarah never waited for somebody to hand her a solution. She'd figure it out herself, and then tell me what we were doing. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth and died there. Used to drive me crazy. And now? Now I wish I'd listened more. Clara sat down across from him. The chair creaked under her weight. She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me about her." "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to say." He was quiet for a long time. The water boiled on the stove. Neither of them moved to take it off. "She was a school teacher," he said finally. "Came west from Virginia. Had a laugh that could fill a whole room and make you forget whatever you were worried about. She planted roses by the front door of our first house in Bitter Creek. Pink ones. Said every home needed something beautiful growing outside it." He stopped. His throat worked. "Daniel had her eyes. Same color. Same way of looking at you like you were the most important thing in the world." Clara didn't speak. She let the words settle. "After they died," he continued, his voice dropping low, I tore those roses out. Them. Couldn't stand looking at them. Couldn't stand looking at anything she'd touched. He rubbed the back of his neck. I moved out here, built this cabin with my own hands. Thought if I got far enough from everything, the remembering would stop. Did it? No, it just got quieter. Like a scream that turns into a whisper. Still there. Still the same words. Just harder to hear. Clara reached across the table and laid her hand over his. She didn't squeeze. She didn't hold. She just rested it there, the way you might touch a door to check if there was fire behind it. He didn't pull away. I know about that whisper, she said. My mother died when I was 12. My father drank himself to death by the time I was 17. I worked for Dr. Hale because he was the only man in Boston who'd hire a woman with no family and no money. When he retired, I had nothing. No position, no prospects, no one. So you came west. I came west because there was nothing left in the East worth staying for. I thought if I could teach, if I could build something new in a place where nobody knew my name, maybe I could outrun the parts of my life that hurt. Caleb turned his hand over. His fingers closed around hers. Not tight, not possessive, just present. You can't outrun it, he said. I know that now. The water boiled over. It hissed on the stove, and the sound broke the moment. He pulled his hand back, stood, and moved the pot. Clara watched him pour 2 cups of coffee with the same steady, careful hands that had pulled a bullet from her leg. Somebody's been watching the cabin, Caleb said, setting the cup in front of her. Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. What? Found tracks this morning. East Ridge, about 200 yards out. Single rider. Sat there long enough to smoke 3 cigarettes. He sat down. They know you're here. Crow sent someone. That's my thinking. How long do we have? Hard to say. Crow's patient. He don't rush things. He'll want to know the layout, know my routines, know how many guns are in this cabin. He'll probe before he strikes. So we use that. We let him think he has time, and we move first. Caleb looked at her over his coffee. We? You keep saying that word like it surprises you. It does. Get over it. He almost laughed. The sound caught in his throat and came out as something closer to a cough, but she saw it. That flicker in his eyes again, that warmth he kept buried under all the years of loss and silence. It was still there, faint, like a coal that had nearly gone out, but still burning. There's a man I trust in Bitter Creek, Caleb said. Name of Holt Jennings. Runs the livery. Former Army, like me. If I ride in and talk to him, he might be able to round up 3 or 4 men willing to ride with us. You'd leave me here alone? For a few hours. I'd be back before dark. And if Crow's man comes while you're gone? Caleb stood and crossed to the shelf beside the fireplace. He pulled down a Winchester rifle and set it on the table in front of her. Then he laid a box of cartridges beside it. Then you make the world small, he said, and you don't miss. Clara picked up the rifle. It was heavier than the revolver, but it felt solid in her hands, reliable, like the man who'd given it to her. Go, she said. I'll be fine. I know you will. He put on his hat, checked his own sidearm, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Clara? What? Bolt this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone who can't tell you what color horse I ride. Bay. Dark bay. White blaze on the forehead. He nodded. If anyone comes to that door and can't tell you that, you put a bullet through the wood first and ask questions after. Understood. He left. She bolted the door. Then she sat down at the table with the Winchester across her lap and waited. The first hour passed slow. She cleaned the rifle, loaded it, checked the action twice. She walked to the window and looked out at the empty grass, the tree line, the ridge where Caleb had found the tracks. Nothing moved. The second hour was worse. The silence pressed in. Every creak of the cabin walls sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind against the window sounded like breathing. She positioned herself in the corner where she could see both the door and the window, and she kept the rifle raised. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Single rider. Coming from the west, not the east, not the direction of Bitter Creek. Clara pressed her back against the wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thumbed the hammer back on the Winchester and steadied the barrel against the window frame. The rider came into view, a man in a brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat, riding a sorrel horse. He moved slow, like a man who wasn't in a hurry, like a man who'd already decided what he was going to do. He stopped 50 yards from the cabin. He didn't dismount. He sat in the saddle, scanning the property. His head turned toward the window where Clara watched. She pulled back, just slightly, just enough to keep herself in shadow. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. She couldn't see what it was at this distance, but he held it up toward the cabin like a message. Then he dropped it on the ground. He turned his horse and rode away. Slow, deliberate, not looking back. Clara waited 5 full minutes before she unbolted the door. She kept the rifle raised as she walked across the dirt yard, her eyes sweeping the ridge, the tree line, the grass. The object on the ground was a piece of cloth, dirty white. She picked it up and unfolded it. Inside was a single bullet, and written on the cloth in dark, careful letters were 4 words. "We know your name." Clara's hands didn't shake. That surprised her. She stood there holding the cloth, reading the words, and something inside her went very still and very cold. Not fear. Something past fear. Something that had been building since the moment she'd crawled out from under that burning stagecoach. She walked back inside, bolted the door, set the cloth and the bullet on the table next to the map. When Caleb returned at dusk, she was sitting at the table with the rifle cleaned, loaded, and resting across her knees. He came through the door and saw the cloth before she said a word. He picked it up, read it. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went dark and hard. "When?" he asked. 3 hours ago, single rider, brown coat, sorrel horse. He dropped it and rode west. That's Rufus Clay, Crow's scout. He doesn't fight. He watches. He reports. He wanted me to know they're coming. That's the game. Crow likes fear. He likes his targets to know he's out there, to spend days jumping at shadows before he ever shows up. By the time he arrives, most people are so rattled they can barely hold a gun. Clara looked at him. "I'm not most people." "I know that." He pulled out the other chair and sat down. "Holt's in. He'll bring 2 others, good men, steady hands. They've dealt with trouble before." "When do we move?" "Not yet. Crow expects us to run or to fort up and wait. He doesn't expect us to come to him. That's our advantage." "So we wait for him to commit? Then we strike the mine while his men are out?" Caleb studied her face. "Where'd you learn to think like this?" "I told you. Dr. Hale was a field surgeon. He talked about tactics the way most men talk about weather. He said every battle has a moment when one side overreaches. You have to recognize it and move before it closes." "Your Dr. Hale sounds like a man I'd have wanted beside me in the cavalry."
He was.
He just happened to spend his last years teaching a woman instead of a soldier. Caleb leaned back. Claire groaned. He looked at the cloth on the table, at the bullet, at the map with its pencil marks and trail lines. "We need to know when Crow moves his main force," he said. "If he sends riders here, the mine will be less guarded. That's when we hit it. A trap, of sorts. Using me as bait." He flinched. It was small, a tightening around the mouth, a flicker of something painful in his eyes. "That ain't what It's exactly what it is, and it's the right call." Clara's voice was calm, steady. "If they're coming for me, let them come. But we choose the ground. We choose the terms." Caleb shook his head slowly. "You're asking me to put you in danger." "I've been in danger since the moment I stepped on that stagecoach, Sheriff. The only thing that's changed is that now I have a rifle and somebody watching my back." He held her gaze for a long time. Something moved between them again. That current of recognition, of shared damage, of two people who had lost too much to be afraid of losing more. "All right," he said. "We do it your way. But you stay in this cabin with the Winchester, and you don't open that door unless you hear my voice. Holt and his men will be positioned on the east and south approaches. When Crow's scouts move in, we close the circle from behind." "And Crow himself?" "He won't be with the scouts. He never leads from the front. He'll stay at the mine, waiting for word." Caleb's voice hardened. "That's when I go to him." "Not alone. Clara, not alone, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name. It hung in the air between them like a hand reaching across a dark room. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just looked at her with those brown-green eyes full of creek water and old grief, and he nodded once. "Not alone," he said. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Caleb's breathing from the chair where he sat watch by the window. The Winchester lay beside her. The cloth with its 4 words sat folded on the table. "We know your name." She whispered into the dark, so quiet that only she could hear it. "Good. Now I'll make sure you never forget it." Outside, the summer heat held the land in its grip. No wind, no sound. Just the vast, breathing darkness of the Montana Territory. And somewhere in it, a man with a scar across his eye, making plans for the people inside this cabin. And inside the cabin, those people were making plans of their own. Holt Jennings arrived before dawn, with 2 men Clara had never seen. One was a tall, lean rancher named Dawson, who carried a Sharps rifle like it was part of his arm. The other was a quiet, half-Cherokee tracker called Levi, who didn't shake hands, didn't smile, and moved through the cabin doorway without making a sound. Holt was different from what Clara expected. Big, barrel-chested, with a thick red beard and hands that swallowed Caleb's when they clasped. But his eyes were careful, steady. The eyes of a man who counted exits when he entered a room. "She's the witness?" Holt asked, looking at Clara. "She is," Caleb said. "And she's staying for the fight?" Clara answered before Caleb could. "I'm staying." Holt studied her for a moment. Then he turned to Caleb. "She's got that same look Sarah used to get right before she told you something you didn't want to hear." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Clara filed the comment away. She'd ask about it later, if there was a later. "Here's what we know," Caleb said, spreading the map on the table. "Crow sent his scout 2 days ago, Rufus Clay. He's confirmed Clara's location. Crow will send riders, probably 3, maybe 4, to take her out. When he does, the mine will be short-handed." "That's when we hit it," Holt said. "That's when we hit it," Dawson leaned over the map. What about the south draw? That ravine runs straight to the mine's lower entrance. Clara spotted that too, Caleb said. Dawson looked at her with new interest. You read maps? I read everything. Levi spoke for the first time. His voice was low, nearly a whisper. 2 men came through the North Pass last night. I cut their trail at the creek crossing. They're moving slow. Scouting positions. The cabin went silent. How far? Caleb asked. 4 miles. Maybe less by now. Caleb straightened up. Then we're out of time. They'll move tonight or tomorrow at first light. He looked around the room. Holt, you and Dawson take the east ridge. Levi, south tree line. When Crow's men approach the cabin, let them get close. Close enough to commit. Then we close the door behind them. And you? Holt asked. I'm riding to the mine. Alone? Not alone. Caleb looked at Clara. Something passed between them. Not a question, not a request. An understanding. Holt shook his head. Caleb, she's been walking on that leg for a week. If things go sideways... I didn't ask for your opinion on this, Holt. You're getting it anyway. You're taking an injured woman into a gunfight with the most dangerous man in Montana territory because... what? Because she's stubborn? Because she reminds you of... Careful. Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous, low and edged, like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. Holt held his hands up. I've followed you into a lot of bad places, Caleb. I'll follow you into this one. But I need to know your head's clear. My head is clear. Is it? Because 3 years ago, you rode out after Crow with nothing but rage and a badge, and you nearly got killed. I pulled you out of that ravine with 2 bullets in you, and blood coming out of places blood shouldn't come from. You looked me in the eye and said you were done. Said you'd let the marshals handle it. Said you were finished chasing ghosts. The cabin was so quiet, Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Caleb didn't look at Holt. He looked at the map. At the small pencil mark Clara had made on the south draw. At his badge, sitting on the table, next to a bullet that had been left as a threat. I was finished, he said. Then she crawled out of the dust with a bullet in her leg and pointed a gun at me. And I realized something. What? That I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when it wasn't about Sarah and Daniel anymore. When it was about stopping a man who'd keep killing until somebody put him in the ground. He picked up his badge and pinned it to his chest. That moment's here. Holt looked at him for a long time. Then he extended his hand. Caleb took it. All right, Sheriff. We do it your way. They moved out at noon. Holt, Dawson, and Levi took their positions around the cabin, invisible, patient, spread across the approaches like a net waiting to close. Clara watched them disappear into the terrain, and then she turned to Caleb. How far to the mine? 6 hours on horseback. We go through the south draw. We add 2 hours, but we come in unseen. Then we take the south draw. He saddled 2 horses. Clara pulled herself into the saddle, and the pain in her thigh nearly sent her back to the ground. She gripped the saddle horn, closed her eyes, and breathed until the world stopped spinning. You all right? Caleb asked. Ask me again when this is over. They rode. The trail narrowed quickly. Single file, just as Caleb had warned. Rock walls pressed in on both sides. The horses picked their way through loose shale and dry creek beds. Clara kept the Winchester balanced across her lap, and her eyes on the ridgeline above. Neither of them spoke for the first hour. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people conserving themselves for what lay ahead. Every word would cost energy they couldn't spare. Then Clara broke it. If something happens to me in there, nothing's going to happen to you. If something happens, she repeated, firm, I need you to find the locket. The one Crow took from the stagecoach. There was a picture inside.
I think it belonged to the widow, Mrs. Calloway. She had a daughter in Bozeman. The daughter deserves to..."
Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking about a dead woman's locket right now?"
"I'm thinking about what matters. If we don't come back, somebody should know what was lost."
He turned in his saddle and looked at her. Dust on her face. Blood still faintly staining the fabric of her dress below the wound. Hair loose around her shoulders, tangled from the ride. And those eyes. Clear, sharp, afraid but refusing to let fear make decisions.
"You're going to come back, Clara. You don't know that."
"No, but I'm choosing to believe it. And right now, that's enough." She held his gaze, then she nodded and faced forward. They didn't speak again until the mine came into view. It was Levi who'd been right about the numbers. 2 men at the main entrance, another on the ridge above, watching the trail with a rifle. That made 3, which meant Crow had sent at least 3 more toward the cabin. The mine was exposed, vulnerable, exactly as Caleb had predicted. They tied the horses in the ravine and climbed on foot. Clara's legs screamed with every step. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, but she kept climbing. Caleb moved ahead of her, checking each turn, each rock, each shadow. His revolver was drawn, hammer back, finger alongside the trigger guard. They reached a ledge overlooking the mine entrance. 2 men sat by a small fire, playing cards on an overturned crate, rifles leaning against the rock wall behind them. Sloppy, careless. Men who didn't expect trouble.
"The one on the ridge," Clara whispered. "He'll see us before we reach the entrance."
"I know. I'll take him. When you hear my shot, the 2 at the fire will scramble for their rifles. You've got maybe 4 seconds before they're armed."
4 seconds.
"Can you do it?" Clara looked down at the 2 men. 50 yards, downhill angle. Moving targets once the shooting started. She thought about the fence post, about making the world small, about the knot in the wood and how her hand had learned to find it before her head did.
"I can do it."
Caleb put his hand on her shoulder, just for a moment. Not a squeeze, not a grip. Just the weight of his palm, steady and warm. "I'll circle to the north and come up behind the ridge, man. Give me 10 minutes. When you hear the shot, you move."
"Caleb."
He stopped.
"Come back,"
she said. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. The hard lines softened just enough to let through something raw and unguarded. Something he hadn't shown anyone in 3 years. "I plan to." He disappeared into the rocks. Clara counted her breaths. She positioned the Winchester against a flat stone, adjusted her angle, and sighted down the barrel at the man on the left. She could see the cards in his hands. She could see the tobacco stain on his chin. She could see the holster on his hip and the knife in his boot. She made the world small. The shot came from the ridge. Sharp, clean. A single crack that echoed off the canyon walls. The 2 men at the fire jumped. The one on the left lunged for his rifle. Clara squeezed the trigger. The Winchester kicked hard against her shoulder, and the man spun sideways, clutching his arm. He went down, but he wasn't finished. He reached for the rifle with his other hand. Clara worked the lever action, fired again. The second bullet hit him in the chest, and he collapsed. The second man had his rifle now. He swung it toward the ledge, searching for her position. Clara ducked as a bullet cracked against the rock 2 feet from her head. Stone fragments stung her face. She rolled left, brought the Winchester up, and fired through the dust. Miss. He fired again. Closer. The bullet whined past her ear. She steadied herself, found him in the sights. Squeezed. The man dropped. Silence. Then Caleb's voice from above. "Clear up here!" Clara exhaled.
Her hands were trembling now. Not during the shooting, not when it mattered, but after. The body's delayed reaction to what the mind had already processed. She pressed her palms against the rock until the shaking stopped. Caleb came down from the ridge, moving fast. He had blood on his knuckles, but none of it was his. "You hit both of them," he said. "I had 4 seconds. I used 3. He almost smiled. Almost. Then his face hardened again as he looked toward the mine entrance. "Crow's inside." "How do you know?" "Because he's not out here. And Crow never runs. He positions. He waits. He lets you come to him on ground he's chosen." Clara reloaded the Winchester. Her fingers moved automatically now. Muscle memory from days of practice at the fence post. Pull. Load. Push. Lock. Then let's not keep him waiting. They entered the mine side by side. The darkness swallowed them within 20 feet. Caleb lit a match, held it up. The tunnel stretched ahead, timbers holding up the ceiling, dust thick in the air. Old mining equipment lay scattered, picks, rusted buckets, coils of frayed rope. They moved slowly. Every footstep echoed. Every breath sounded too loud. "Caleb Mercer." The voice came from deep inside the mine. Calm, amused, echoing off the stone walls like a sermon in an empty church. "I was wondering when you'd come." Caleb stopped. His revolver was up, aimed into the darkness. "The badge and the grudge," the voice continued. "They told me about you. Said you'd been sniffing around for years. Said you lost your family on the Bozeman Trail." A pause. "My condolences." Clara felt Caleb's body go rigid beside her. Every muscle locked. His breathing changed, shorter, harder, controlled with visible effort. "Walk out, Crow," Caleb said. "Hands where I can see them." Laughter. Low, rolling, echoing. "You brought the schoolgirl. I'm impressed. Most men would have hidden her somewhere safe and come alone to play hero. But you brought her right to me." Another pause. "That's either brave or stupid. I haven't decided which." "Last chance, Crow. Walk out." "You know what I like about this territory, Sheriff? Space. Miles and miles of nothing. A man can do whatever he wants out here, and by the time anyone finds out, he's already gone. I've been doing whatever I want for a long time, and you, with your little badge and your little cabin and your little broken heart, you think you're going to stop me?" A match struck in the darkness ahead. A lantern flared, and there he was, Elias Crow, standing 30 feet away in a widened chamber where the mine shaft opened up. Tall, lean, the scar across his left eye was thick and white, pulling the skin tight so that the eye seemed permanently narrowed, permanently amused. He wore a long black coat and a gun belt with 2 revolvers. His hands hung at his sides, relaxed. He looked at Clara. "There she is, the one who crawled away. I have to say, miss, you've caused me more trouble than any 10 men." He tilted his head. "You should have died with the others. Would have been easier." "For you," Clara said. "Not for me." Crow's smile widened. "She's got a mouth on her, Sheriff. I can see why you like her." "This is over, Crow." Caleb's voice was flat, dead calm. The kind of calm that comes right before the worst kind of storm. "Is it?" Crow reached slowly into his coat pocket. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. But Crow didn't draw a weapon. He pulled out a gold locket, oval-shaped. He held it up and let it swing on its chain. Clara heard Caleb's breath catch. "Recognize this?" Crow asked. He opened it with one thumb.
Pretty woman, dark hair. And the boy couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. He had her eyes. Caleb made not a word, not a cry. Something from deeper than either. A sound torn from the place where a man keeps the things that broke him. "I've carried this for 3 years," Crow said. "Kept it because it was beautiful. Because it reminded me of that day on the Bozeman Trail. Your woman begged, Sheriff. Did you know that? She got down on her knees in the dirt and begged for the boy's life. Said she'd do anything, give anything." "Stop talking." I told her no. Crow's smile didn't waver. "And then Caleb fired. The bullet hit Crow in the left shoulder. Crow staggered, but didn't fall. In the same motion, his right hand drew and fired. The bullet caught Caleb in the side, spinning him against the mine wall. Clara screamed his name. Caleb slid down the wall, clutching his side. Blood poured between his fingers. His revolver clattered on the stone floor. Crow straightened up. He pressed his hand against his wounded shoulder, looked at the blood, and shook his head like a man disappointed by a minor inconvenience. "You shoot like a man who's angry," Crow said, walking forward. "Anger makes you fast, but it makes you sloppy." He raised his revolver and aimed it at Caleb's head. "I don't get angry, Sheriff. I just get results." Clara stepped out from behind the timber where the gunfire had driven her. The Derringer was in her hand, the small 2-shot pocket gun she'd carried since the stagecoach. It felt like nothing. It weighed almost nothing. But at 10 feet, it was enough. "Drop it," she said. Crow turned. He looked at the Derringer and then at her face, and for the first time his smile faltered. Not because of the gun, because of her eyes. Because there was nothing in them he could use. No fear, no hesitation, no doubt. Just a cold, clear certainty that he had never seen in a victim before. "The schoolgirl," he said softly. "The woman who survived you," Clara corrected. "Drop the gun." "You won't shoot me." "You smiled while you killed those people on the stagecoach. You laughed when you took that locket from a dead woman's neck. You left me to bleed in the dust, and you sent your men to finish the job." Her hand was steady, perfectly steady. "I will absolutely shoot you." Crow's eyes moved between Clara and Caleb, calculating, always calculating, even now. He swung his gun toward Caleb. Clara fired. The bullet hit Crow in the throat. He staggered forward, one hand flying to his neck, blood pouring through his fingers. He tried to raise his revolver. His arm wouldn't obey. He took another step, then another. He charged at her. Clara fired the second barrel. It caught him in the chest, but didn't stop him. His momentum carried him forward, crashing into her, driving her backward into the mine wall. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Crow's weight crushed her against the stone. Then Caleb was there, rising from the floor with blood soaking his shirt, moving on pure will because his body had nothing left. He grabbed Crow by the collar and threw him sideways. Crow stumbled, tripped over a rusted rail track, and went down hard. He didn't get up. His body twitched once, his hand opened. The locket fell from his fingers and clinked against the stone floor. The gold caught the lantern light and winked once before going still. Caleb swayed. His hand went to his side. He took one step toward Clara, then his legs buckled. She caught him. All 190 pounds of him, she caught him. Her bad legs screamed and nearly gave out, but she locked her knees and held on. She lowered him to the ground, cradling his head against her chest. "Caleb! Caleb, look at me!" His eyes were open but unfocused. His skin was gray. The blood at his side was dark, venous, not arterial, which meant he had time, but not much. She tore a strip from her underskirt and pressed it hard against the wound. He groaned.
"Stay with me," she said. "You said I wouldn't face this alone. Don't you dare leave me now."
His lips moved, barely a whisper. "Did you get him?" She looked back at Crow's body, still, silent. The scar across his dead eye caught the lamplight like a final frozen smile.
"I got him."
Caleb's hand found hers. His grip was weak, nothing like the strong, steady hand that had pulled a bullet from her leg, that had held the reins while she leaned against his chest, that had closed around her fingers across the kitchen table. But it was there. He was there.
"Told you," he whispered. "Told you you'd come back."
We both came back. And you're going to stay. You hear me? You're staying. She pressed harder on the wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and relentless. His breathing was shallow. His eyelids fluttered. Clara looked toward the mine entrance. Daylight still showed at the far end of the tunnel. She needed help. She needed a doctor. She needed someone to walk through that entrance right now with bandages and whiskey and steady hands. She opened her mouth and screamed. "Help! Somebody help us!" The echo bounced off the walls and died in the dark. She screamed again, and again, until her throat was raw and her voice cracked, and the only sound left was Caleb's breathing, growing shallower with every passing second, and the distant, indifferent silence of the Montana mountains pressing in from every side. Then, footsteps. Running. The sound of boots on stone. Holt Jennings burst through the mine entrance with a lantern in one hand and a rifle in the other. Dawson was right behind him. They stopped when they saw Crow's body. They stopped again when they saw Caleb on the ground, Clara bent over him, her hands covered in his blood.
"He's hit," Clara said. "Left side, below the ribs. The bullet's still inside."
Holt dropped to his knees. He pulled Caleb's shirt open and looked at the wound. His face told Clara everything she needed to know before he said a word. "We need to get him to town. Now. Doc Prentice is the closest thing to a surgeon within 50 miles. "Then get the horses." Dawson was already running. Holt looked at Clara. "The men we caught at the cabin, Crow's scouts. They're tied up. Levi's watching them. But they talked. They said Crow had one more man out there, someone who wasn't with the group." Clara's blood went cold.
"Who?"
They didn't know a name. Just said Crow kept someone separate, someone who handled things that needed handling. A cleaner. Clara looked down at Caleb. His eyes were closed now. His breathing was steady, but thin, like a candle flame in a draft.
"It doesn't matter right now," she said. "Right now, we get him to a doctor. Everything else comes after."
Holt nodded. He lifted Caleb like the man weighed nothing and carried him toward the entrance. Clara followed. She stopped once, turned back, and picked up the gold locket from the floor beside Crow's body. She opened it. A woman with dark hair. A boy with her eyes. Sarah and Daniel Mercer, frozen in time, smiling at a world that had already forgotten them. Clara closed the locket and put it in her pocket. Then she walked out of the mine and into the fading light, her hands still wet with the blood of the man who'd told her she wouldn't face this alone. The ride to Bitter Creek took 4 hours. It should have taken 2, but Caleb kept sliding in the saddle, and twice they had to stop while Holt held him upright, and Clara pressed fresh cloth against the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She rode beside him the entire way. Her hand gripped his arm whenever he swayed. Her eyes never left his face. She watched his skin turn from gray to white, watched the sweat bead along his hairline, despite the evening air cooling around them, watched his lips move without sound, as if he were talking to someone she couldn't see.
"Stay with me," she said over and over. "Caleb, stay with me." Once, his eyes opened. He looked at her and said, clear as morning, "Sarah?" Clara's chest cracked open. Felt it. A physical thing, like a rib breaking inward. But she didn't flinch. She leaned closer and said, "It's Clara. And you're not done yet, Sheriff. You hear me? You're not done." His eyes closed again, but his hand found the saddle horn and held on. Bitter Creek appeared as a scattering of lights in the darkness. Not much of a town. A main street, a saloon, a general store, a livery, a church with a crooked steeple. But it had a doctor, and right now, that was all that mattered in the world. Holt shouted as they rode in. Doors opened, faces appeared in lamplight. A man in a white shirt with rolled sleeves came running from a house at the end of the street. Dr. Prentice, small and wiry, with spectacles that caught the light and hands that moved fast. "Gunshot," Clara said before anyone asked. "Left side, below the ribs. Bullet still inside. He's lost blood for 4 hours. Pulse is weak and thready. He was conscious intermittently for the first 2 hours, unresponsive for the last 2. Prentice looked at her. "You a nurse?" "Physician's assistant, Boston." "Then scrub your hands and get in here. I need someone who won't faint." They carried Caleb into Prentice's office and laid him on the operating table. Clara washed her hands in carbolic solution, rolled up her sleeves, and stood across from the doctor. Holt waited in the doorway, hat in his hands, his big frame filling the space. "Close the door," Prentice said, "and pray if you're the type." Holt closed the door. Prentice cut away Caleb's shirt. The wound was ugly, a dark hole ringed with bruised, swollen flesh. The skin around it was hot to the touch. Clara could see the early signs of infection already setting in. The bullet had been inside him for hours, carried through dust and mine grit and the sweat of a hard ride. "Forceps," Prentice said. Clara handed them over. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady in the mine. They'd been steady on the ride. She would not allow them to shake now. Prentice probed the wound. Caleb's body jerked on the table, and a low moan escaped his throat, even in unconsciousness. Clara put her hand on his chest and pressed down. Not hard, just enough to anchor him. "I feel it," Prentice muttered. "It's lodged against the lower rib. Didn't fragment. That's the one piece of luck this man's had today." He worked the forceps deeper. Clara watched, not with the detachment of a medical professional, but with something fiercer, something that burned behind her eyes and made her jaw ache from clenching. The bullet came out. Prentice held it up, examined it, and dropped it into a tin pan with a sound that rang through the quiet room. "Now we stitch and we wait," he said. "The next 12 hours will tell us." Clara nodded. "I'll stay with him." "I expected you would." Prentice threaded the needle. "Who did this to him?" "Elias Crow." Prentice's hands paused, just for a second. Then he resumed stitching. "Crow's dead?" "Yes." "You're certain?" "I put 2 bullets in him myself." Prentice looked at her over his spectacles. Whatever he saw in her face, he didn't question it. He finished the stitches, 14 of them, bandaged the wound, and washed his hands. "Infection's the enemy now," he said. "Keep the wound clean. Change the dressing every 4 hours. If the fever spikes past 103, come get me immediately. I'll be across the street." "Thank you, Doctor." Prentice dried his hands. He paused at the door. "Miss Whitmore, the man on that table hasn't let anyone within 10 feet of his heart since he lost his family. The fact that you're standing here tells me something's changed." He put on his hat. "Don't let him die. This town needs it, Sheriff, and frankly, he needs whatever it is you've brought back into his life." Then he left, and Clara was alone with Caleb. She pulled a chair beside the table and sat down.
She took his hand. It was cold, colder than it should have been. She held it between both of hers and pressed it against her chest, willing her warmth into his skin. "You stubborn man," she whispered.
"You impossible, stubborn, broken man. You pulled a bullet out of my leg and sat up 3 nights watching my fever and taught me to shoot and told me I wouldn't face this alone. And now you're lying here and I'm the one sitting in the chair and you don't get to leave. You don't get to go where I can't follow. Not after everything." His face was still, pale as the sheet beneath him. The only movement was the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Clara didn't sleep. She changed the dressing at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4. Each time, she cleaned the wound with carbolic solution, packed it with fresh gauze, and checked for the spreading redness that would signal infection taking hold. Each time, her hands performed the work with practiced precision, while her heart hammered against her ribs like something caged. At dawn, the fever came. It hit fast and hard. 1 hour he was cool, the next he was burning. Sweat soaked the sheets, his body trembled. His eyes moved behind closed lids, chasing things only he could see. He started talking. Fragments, pieces of conversations from years past, jumbled together like pages torn from different books. "Daniel, get down from there. I told you. I told you not to climb that." Clara pressed a cool rag to his forehead. "It's all right. I'm here." Sarah, the roses. You said you'd plant them by the door." "Caleb, listen to me. It's Clara." 2 hours. I was 2 hours behind. If I'd left earlier, if I'd—" His voice broke into a sob, a raw, wrenching sound that came from a place so deep it didn't have a name. Clara had never heard a grown man cry like that. Not the polite, controlled kind of grief that society permitted, but the ugly, gasping, broken kind that only comes when the walls finally fall. She climbed onto the table beside him. She didn't think about it. She didn't consider whether it was proper or appropriate or what anyone would think if they walked in. She lay down next to him and put her arm across his chest and held him. "You couldn't have saved them," she said into his ear. 2 hours or 2 minutes. You couldn't have saved them. There were 7 men with guns, and you were 1 man on a horse. You would have died with them, and then nobody would have been left to stop Crow. Nobody would have been left to find me in the dust. He thrashed. She held on. "Listen to me. Sarah loved you. Daniel loved you. And they wouldn't want you to carry this. They wouldn't want you to drown in a guilt that isn't yours. You hear me? This wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." His thrashing slowed. His breathing evened. The fever still raged, but something in him had heard her. Some part of his mind that was still fighting, still reaching for solid ground. Clara held him through the morning. She held him through the afternoon, when the fever spiked again and Prentice came in to check the wound, and shook his head, but said nothing. She held him through the evening, when Holt brought food she didn't eat and water she forced herself to drink. "Any change?" Holt asked from the doorway. "The fever's holding. It hasn't broken." "How long can he—" "I don't know." Holt nodded slowly. He looked at Caleb on the table, then at Clara beside him, and something in his expression softened. "He'd fight his way out of hell for you," Holt said. "You know that, right?" "He's not fighting for me. He's fighting for himself. I'm just giving him a reason." Holt left. The night came on again. Clara changed the dressing, checked the wound. The redness had spread, but slowly. Not the angry, streaking red of blood poisoning, but a diffuse warmth that said the body was fighting, struggling, not surrendering. At midnight, Clara ran out of clean gauze.
She tore strips from her own underskirt, then from the curtain by the window, then from a spare shirt she found in Prentice's cabinet. Her hands moved automatically. Her mind had gone to that beyond exhaustion, where thought becomes unnecessary and action is everything. At 2 in the morning, Caleb opened his eyes. Clara was leaning over him, pressing a fresh dressing against the wound, when she felt his gaze on her face. She looked up and found him watching her. His eyes were clear, focused, present. "Clara." His voice was a wreck, dry, cracked, barely audible. But it was his voice, not the fever's. His. "Don't talk. You need water." She held a cup to his lips. He drank, slowly. Each swallow was an effort. "How long?" he asked. 2 days. The fever just broke." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I heard you," he said. "When I was... wherever I was. I heard what you said." Clara's throat tightened. "Which part?" "All of it." He swallowed hard. "About Sarah. About the guilt. About it not being my fault." "I meant every word." "I know. That's why I came back." She took his hand. This time, his fingers tightened around hers. Weak, but deliberate. A choice. "There's something you need to know," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the gold locket. She set it on his chest. He looked at it, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled. "Where?" "Crow had it. He was carrying it when he died. It fell from his hand in the mine." Caleb picked up the locket with trembling fingers. He opened it. Clara watched his face as he looked at the picture inside. Sarah's dark hair, Daniel's eyes. 3 years of grief and rage and silence, compressed into a small oval of gold. A sound came out of him. Not the delirious sobbing of the fever. Something quieter, deeper. The sound of a man finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what he'd lost, without the armor of anger to protect him. Tears ran down his temples and into his hair. He held the locket against his chest and wept. Not for a minute. Not for 5. He wept until there was nothing left, and Clara sat beside him and let him, because she understood that some grief needs to be emptied completely before the wound can close. When it was over, he lay still, spent, hollowed out. But something in his face had changed. The lines around his mouth had softened. The tension in his jaw had eased. He looked like a man who had set down a weight he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten what his body felt like without it. "I thought killing him would fix it," Caleb said. "I thought if I could just get to Crow, put a bullet in him, that the hole inside me would close, that I'd feel something again." And it didn't. When that bullet hit him, I felt nothing. Nothing at all. Just the same emptiness, the same silence. Like the house was still burned and I was still standing in the road, staring at it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Justice isn't about filling a hole, Caleb. It's about stopping someone from digging more of them. Crow can't hurt anyone else. He can't take another locket. He can't make another woman beg for her child's life. That's not revenge. That's protection. Is that how you see it? That's how it is. Revenge is for the dead. Justice is for the living. And you and I are still living." He looked at her. His eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, looking for the reassurance people offer when they're trying to be kind rather than honest. He didn't find it. He found only the same clear, steady certainty that had stared down Crow in the mine.
"When did you get so wise?" he asked. "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of watching pain go to waste." He almost smiled. Not quite. His body didn't have the energy for it yet. But it was there, in the corners of his eyes. Prentice came in at dawn. He checked the wound, checked the fever, checked Caleb's pulse and breathing. Then he straightened up and looked at Clara.
"The infection's receding. He's going to live." Clara's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the table, but for a moment, just one moment, the strength she'd held for 2 days cracked, and she bent forward and pressed her forehead against the table and breathed. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to Prentice, not to anyone in particular, just out into the world, to whatever force or luck or stubborn will had kept this man's heart beating through the night. Prentice put his hand on her shoulder. "You saved his life, Miss Whitmore. The wound care, the dressing changes, staying through the fever. Most people would have panicked. You didn't." "I couldn't afford to panic." "No, but most people can't afford a lot of things and they do them anyway. You chose differently. That matters." He left them alone. Clara pulled the chair close to the table and sat down. Exhaustion hit her like a wall. Sudden, total, crushing. She hadn't slept in over 40 hours. Her leg throbbed, her hands ached, her eyes burned. "Clara," Caleb's voice, quiet, gentle. "Sleep. I should change the 'it can wait 2 hours.' Sleep." She put her head down on the edge of the table, her hand still holding his. She was asleep in seconds. When she woke, the sun was high and the room was warm. Caleb was awake, propped up slightly on a folded blanket someone had placed behind his head. Holt sat in the corner, whittling a piece of wood. "Afternoon," Holt said. Clara sat up. Her neck was stiff, her back ached, and for a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Caleb's face, and everything came back. "How do you feel?" she asked him. "Like I got shot and dragged across 20 miles of territory." "That's because you did." "I know. Just checking if it was a dream." Holt stood up and pocketed his knife. "Marshall's here," he said. Clara turned. "What?" "Marshal Thomas Avery. Rode in this morning from Helena. Heard about Crow. Wants to take statements." Caleb's expression hardened. "Now? He shows up now? After 2 years of letters and reports and not a damn thing done?" "Politics, brother. The territory's different when there's a body to show for it." A knock on the door. Holt opened it, and a man walked in. Marshal Thomas Avery was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a long coat and a badge that was twice the size of Caleb's. He had the look of a man who spent more time in offices than on horseback, but was trying hard to pretend otherwise. "Sheriff Mercer." Avery removed his hat. "I'm glad to see you're alive." "That makes one of us who came in time," Caleb said flatly. Avery's jaw tightened, but he let it pass. "I've been to the mine. Crow's body has been identified. 3 of his men are in custody. 2 more were killed at the mine entrance." He looked at Clara. "I understand you're the surviving witness from the stagecoach attack." "I am." "And you shot Crow." "I did." "With a derringer, at approximately 10 feet.
"Closer to 8. Avery studied her.
"Miss Whitmore, I've been chasing Elias Crow's trail for the better part of a year. He's killed at least 23 people across 3 territories. Federal warrants, territorial warrants, reward postings, none of it brought him down." He paused. "A school teacher with a pocket gun did." "I'm not a school teacher yet," Clara said. "And I had help." She looked at Caleb. He looked at her. Holt looked at both of them and suddenly found his whittling very interesting. Avery reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. There's a reward, $3,000, posted by the territory for Crow's capture or killing. It belongs to you, Miss Whitmore. Clara shook her head. Split it between Holt, Dawson, Levi, and the town of Bitter Creek. They earned it. And you? I don't want his money. I want his name forgotten. Avery looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, folded the paper, and put it away. I'll need formal statements from both of you when the sheriff's able. Give us a week, Clara said. I'll be at the hotel. Avery put his hat back on, nodded to Holt, and left. The room was quiet. Caleb stared at the ceiling. Holt went back to whittling. $3,000, Caleb said. I don't want it. I heard you. I'm just saying, that's more money than most people in this territory see in 5 years. And it came from a man who collected lockets from the people he murdered. I won't spend a cent of it. Caleb looked at her. Something in his expression, beneath the pain, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the grief that was still draining from him like water from a cracked vessel, something warm and steady took root. Not love, not yet. Love was too big a word for two broken people who'd known each other barely 2 weeks. But the foundation of it, the ground it would grow from. You're a stubborn woman, Clara Whitmore. You've said that before. Gonna keep saying it until you prove me wrong. Then you'll be saying it a long time, Sheriff. Holt chuckled from the corner. Lord help us all. The next 3 days passed slowly. Caleb healed. The infection retreated. Color returned to his face. He progressed from lying flat, to sitting up, to standing for short periods, leaning on Clara's shoulder, with his arm around her, both of them moving carefully. 2 wounded people, learning how to hold each other up. On the 4th day, Clara walked to the general store and bought gauze, carbolic acid, and a new dress. The one she'd worn since the stagecoach was beyond saving. Torn, blood-stained, held together by necessity and little else. The shopkeeper, a woman named Ruth, looked at her with wide eyes. "You're her," Ruth said. "The woman who killed Crow." "I'm the woman who's buying gauze and a dress." Ruth wrapped the package in brown paper and slid it across the counter. "It's on the house. I can pay." "I know you can. But my husband drove that stagecoach route for 6 years before Crow made it too dangerous. He switched to freight hauling. Takes twice as long, pays half as much." Ruth pushed the package closer. "You did something nobody else could. Least I can do is give you a dress." Clara took the package. "Thank you, Ruth." "Thank you, Miss Whitmore." Clara walked back to the doctor's office. Halfway there, she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Whitmore!" She turned. A man stood in the alley between the saloon and the feed store. Lean, dark-haired. A face she didn't recognize, but eyes she did. Cold, flat, calculating. The same kind of eyes Crow had. The eyes of a man who measured everything in terms of what it could cost him. "Who are you?" Clara said. Her hand moved to her hip, but the Derringer was in Prentice's office with Caleb. She had nothing. "My name doesn't matter. I worked for Mr. Crow. Not the kind of work you've seen. The other kind. The kind that happens after. Crow's dead." "I know. That's why I'm here." He took a step closer. Clara took a step back. "There's a ledger. Crow kept records. Names, dates, locations, every job, every payoff, every lawman he bribed, every judge he owned. That ledger is in a strongbox at the mine. Nobody knows about it except me." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Crow's dead and I'm next. The men he paid off, the ones in that ledger, they'll come for it. And when they can't find it, they'll come for anyone who might know where it is." His eyes held hers. "That includes your sheriff." Clara's blood went cold. "You're saying this isn't over?" "I'm saying Crow was the hand. There's a body behind him. Men with money, with connections, with reasons to keep that ledger buried." He glanced down the street. "I'm leaving the territory tonight. If you're smart, you'll get that ledger before they do." "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't. But ask yourself, if I wanted you dead, would I be standing here talking?" He tipped his hat. "Good luck, Miss Whitmore. You're going to need it." He turned and walked into the alley. By the time Clara reached the corner, he was gone. She stood there, the package of gauze and the new dress clutched against her chest, her heart pounding. The sun beat down on the dusty street of Bitter Creek, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang twice. She walked back to Prentice's office. Caleb was sitting up in bed, drinking broth that Holt had brought from the saloon. He looked better, stronger, clearer. The color in his face was almost normal. He saw her expression and set the broth down. "What happened?" Clara closed the door. She set the package on the table and sat down across from him. She told him everything. The man in the alley, the ledger, the strongbox, the warning. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face was hard. "A ledger," he said. "Names, dates, payoffs, corrupt lawmen, crooked judges. If that exists, it changes everything. It's not just Crow's gang. It's the whole network that protected him. That's why he operated for so long without getting caught. He had people covering his trail. And now those people want the evidence destroyed." Caleb swung his legs off the table. Pain flashed across his face, but he pushed through it. "What are you doing?" Clara said. "Getting up." "You have a hole in your side." "And there's a ledger in a mine that could bring down every corrupt official in Montana Territory. That hole's going to have to wait." "Caleb, you can barely stand." He stood, swayed, gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white, but he stayed upright. "I've been lying down for 4 days, while the people who helped Crow murder my family sit in their offices counting their money. I'm done lying down." Clara stood and put her hand on his chest, not pushing him back, just holding him still. "Then we do this together," she said. "But we do it smart. You ride out to that mine in this condition, you'll open that wound before you get halfway there, and I'll be burying you instead of marrying you." The words came out before she could stop them. They hung in the air, bold and unexpected, and Clara felt heat rise in her face for the first time since she could remember. Caleb stared at her. "What did you say?" "I said we'd do this smart." "After that." Clara lifted her chin. "You heard me." He looked at her. The hardness in his face melted, layer by layer, until what was left was something open, raw, unguarded. He reached up and touched her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, rough against her skin. "Is that a proposal, Miss Whitmore?" "That's a statement of intent, Sheriff Mercer." His hand slid behind her neck. He pulled her close, gently, carefully, mindful of his wound and her leg and all the broken places between them. Their foreheads touched. "Then I accept your statement of intent," he said. "But the ledger comes first." "The ledger comes first." He kissed her. Not the kind of kiss that happens in stories. Not sweeping, not dramatic, not set against a painted sunset. It was small and quiet and fierce. The kiss of two people who had walked through fire together and come out the other side, still breathing, still standing, still reaching for each other in the dark. When they pulled apart, Clara's eyes were bright. "We'll send Holt to the mine at first light."
He knows the territory, and he's not on anyone's list. He retrieves the strongbox, brings it back here, and we hand it to Avery. And if Avery's name is in that ledger? Clara paused and considered that. The thought settled into her stomach like a stone. Then we find someone who isn't. Caleb nodded. His hand found hers. He held on. Not weak anymore. Not the fading grip of a dying man. Strong. Steady.
The grip of someone who had found something worth holding. Together, he said. Together. Holt rode out before sunrise. Clara stood in the doorway of Prentice's office and watched him disappear into the gray light, his Sharps rifle across his saddle, and Dawson riding a quarter-mile behind as cover. Neither man looked back. They knew what they were riding toward, and they knew what was at stake. Caleb sat on the edge of the operating table, buttoning his shirt with slow, deliberate fingers. The wound pulled with every movement, but he didn't wince. He'd been a cavalry medic. He knew the difference between pain that meant danger and pain that meant healing. This was the second kind. It burned, but it was honest. If the ledger's there, he said, we've got maybe 2 days before word gets out that Crow's strongbox has been opened. After that, every man whose name is in those pages will be running or fighting. Either way, they'll come for us first. Clara closed the door. Then we don't wait 2 days. Holt brings the strongbox back, we open it, and we ride to Helena ourselves. Helena's a 3-day ride. Then we leave today. Caleb looked at her. I'm 4 days out of surgery, Clara. And I had a bullet dug out of my leg 12 days ago. We're not healthy people, Sheriff. We're just stubborn ones. He almost smiled. Then his face sobered. Avery's still in town. He's the federal authority. By rights, the ledger should go to him. And if his name's in it? Then we'll know, and we'll act accordingly. That's a gamble. Everything since I found you under that cottonwood tree has been a gamble. He stood, tested his weight. The pain flared through his side like a hot wire, but his legs held. I'm tired of playing it safe. Safe hasn't caught anyone. Safe hasn't brought justice. Safe is what let Crow operate for 5 years while good men wrote letters and waited for someone else to do the hard thing. Clara crossed the room and handed him his gun belt. He buckled it on. The weight of the revolver on his hip settled something inside him. Not aggression, not violence. Readiness. The feeling of a man who was done being acted upon and had decided to act. There's something else, Clara said. She'd been holding it since the night before, turning it over in her mind, testing it from every angle. The man in the alley, Crow's cleaner. He said the people behind Crow have money and connections. That means lawyers, politicians, maybe judges. I've thought about that. If we hand the ledger to the wrong person, it disappears, and we disappear with it. Caleb buckled his belt and looked at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we make copies. Before we hand anything over to anyone, we write down every name, every date, every transaction. We put one copy in the strongbox for the marshal, and we keep one copy somewhere safe, somewhere only we know about. Insurance. Survival. He studied her face. Dr. Hale didn't just teach you maps and wound care, did he? He taught me that powerful men protect themselves first and justice second. The only way to hold them accountable is to make sure the evidence can't be buried with you. Caleb nodded slowly. All right, we make copies, but we do it fast. The moment Holt rides back into town with that strongbox, the clock starts. They waited. The morning dragged. Clara changed Caleb's dressing, made him eat, made him drink water he didn't want. He paced the room, 4 steps one way, 4 steps back, until she told him to sit down
before he tore his stitches. "You're worse than Daniel," he muttered, and then stopped. The name hung in the air. He hadn't spoken his son's name casually, naturally, as part of an ordinary sentence, in 3 years. It had always been wrapped in grief, in reverence, in the careful handling of something sacred and shattered. This time, it had just come out,
like a word that belonged in his mouth again. Clara heard it. She didn't make a thing of it. She just said, "Sit down, Caleb." He sat. At noon, hoofbeats. Clara went to the window. Holt and Dawson rode in fast, not panicked, but urgent. Holt had a metal strongbox strapped to his saddle, blackened with soot and dented at one corner. He swung down, grabbed it, and carried it straight into Prentice's office. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. "Found it right where your alley friend said it'd be," Holt said. "Hidden behind a false wall in the main shaft. Whoever built that compartment knew what they were doing." "Was anyone there?" Caleb asked. "2 riders showed up while we were inside. Dawson held the entrance. They saw his rifle and turned around." Holt wiped sweat from his forehead. "But they'll be back, and they'll bring more than 2. Caleb looked at the strongbox. Heavy iron, padlocked. He pulled his revolver, pressed the barrel against the lock, and fired. The sound was deafening in the small room. The lock blew apart and clattered to the floor. He opened the lid. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, thick as a family Bible. Beneath it, a stack of letters tied with string. And beneath those, a small canvas pouch that clinked when Caleb lifted it. Gold coins. Payment for silence. Clara took the ledger and opened it to the first page. Her eyes moved fast, scanning the entries. Dates, names, amounts, locations. Each line written in a small, precise hand. Crow's handwriting, neat as a bookkeeper's. "My God," she whispered. "What?" "It's everything. Every robbery, every killing, every payoff." She turned a page. Another. Her finger stopped on the line halfway down. "Judge Henry Aldrich, Helena District Court. $200. August 14, 76. Services rendered. Dismissal of territorial warrants." Caleb leaned over her shoulder. "Aldridge threw out the warrants against Crow. I filed those warrants myself. I rode to Helena twice to push them through. And this is why they disappeared." Clara turned another page. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Franklin Cobb, $150. Monthly retainer." She looked up at Caleb. Crow had a federal marshal on his payroll. Cobb. That son of a... Cobb was the one who told me the marshals were stretched thin, that there weren't enough resources to pursue Crow. He stood in my office and looked me in the eye and said they were doing everything they could. He was doing everything he could. For Crow. Caleb's hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from rage. The deep, cold kind that had lived in his bones for 3 years. The kind he'd aimed at Crow in the mine. But this was different. Crow was a killer. He was evil, but he was simple. These men, the judges, the marshals, the officials, they were the ones who had given Crow room to operate. They were the reason Sarah and Daniel were dead. Not just Crow's bullet. Their silence, their corruption, their choice to take gold and look the other way. "Keep reading," he said. Clara read, page after page. The ledger was meticulous. Crow had documented everything with the precision of a man who understood that records were power, that knowing what you'd paid someone, and for what, was the only leverage that mattered. She stopped on a page near the back. Her face went pale. "What?" Caleb said. "Thomas Avery." The room went dead silent. "No," Caleb said. "Thomas Avery, U.S. Marshal. 3 payments,
September 76, January 77, and March 78. Total, $600. Clara's voice was flat, controlled, but her hands gripped the ledger so hard the pages buckled. Services rendered. Territorial intelligence. Advance warning of law enforcement movements. Caleb sat down, not because his wound demanded it, because the ground had just shifted under his feet. "Avery," he said. "Avery's in town right now."
He's been here for 3 days. He's seen Clara. He knows she's the witness. He knows about the mine. Holt straightened up. And he knows Crow kept records? He might. If he was on Crow's payroll, he'd know how Crow operated. He'd know about the ledger. Then why hasn't he moved on it? Holt asked. Clara closed the ledger. Because he didn't know where it was. Nobody did, except Crow and his cleaner. Avery's been waiting, watching, figuring out if anyone knew about the strongbox before he made a move. "And now we've brought it straight into town," Caleb said, "right into his reach." They looked at each other. The weight of it settled over the room like a storm front, heavy, pressing, inevitable. "We can't give him the ledger," Clara said. "We can't keep it here either. If Avery's dirty, he'll find a way to take it. A warrant, a search, some legal pretense that makes it official. Then we go over his head." Clara's mind was working fast now, the way it had over the map in Caleb's cabin, the way it had in the mine. Patterns, angles, escape routes. Who's above a U.S. Marshal? The federal court in Denver, or the territorial governor? The governor. Clara opened the ledger again and flipped through the pages. Her finger traced the entries. "I don't see a governor's name anywhere in here. Not Montana. Not any territory." "Governor Edmund Pierce. He's new. Appointed 6 months ago by Washington. He's been making noise about cleaning up the territory. New circuit judges, new marshals, crackdowns on the trail gangs." "Is he honest?" "I don't know, but he's not in this ledger. And right now, that's the best we've got." Clara grabbed a sheet of paper from Prentice's desk. She pulled the ink pot close and picked up a pen. "I'm copying every page. Names, dates, amounts, everything. You keep watch." "Clara, that's 200 pages. "Then I'd better write fast." She wrote. For 3 hours, she transcribed every entry in the ledger in her small, precise hand. Caleb stood by the window, watching the street. Holt guarded the door. Dawson sat on the porch with his sharps across his knees, watching both ends of the main street. Twice, Clara's hand cramped so badly she had to stop and flex her fingers. Twice, she picked the pen back up and kept writing. At 4 o'clock, she finished. 43 pages of copied entries. Every name, every dollar, every betrayal. She folded the copies, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it with candle wax. Then she handed it to Caleb. "This goes somewhere safe. Not here, not the cabin. Somewhere only you know." He took the envelope. "There's a hollow beneath the floorboards of the church. Old Pastor Whitfield showed me years ago. He used it to hide whiskey from his wife. Nobody alive knows about it except me. Now nobody alive knows about it except us." He tucked the envelope inside his shirt. Then he looked at the ledger, still open on the table. "We need to get this to Governor Pierce. But Helena's 3 days away, and Avery will know something's wrong the moment we leave town." "Then we don't both go." Clara's voice was steady. "You stay. You're the sheriff. You have a reason to be here. You keep Avery close. Keep him calm. Keep him thinking the strongbox was empty or unimportant." "And you?" "I ride to Helena." "Alone?" "With Holt. And the ledger." Caleb shook his head. "No, absolutely not. You're—" "I'm what, Caleb? Injured?
Tired? A woman? Her eyes flashed. I survived a massacre. I crawled through dust with a bullet in my leg. I shot Elias Crow in the throat with a 2-shot Derringer. I think I can manage a 3-day ride.
That ain't what I mean, and you know it.
Then say what you mean.
He stepped close to her. His voice dropped low. Not angry, not commanding. Afraid. For the first time since she'd known him, she heard real fear in his voice. And it wasn't for himself.
I just got you, he said. After 3 years of nothing, after losing everything I ever cared about, I found you. And you want me to watch you ride off toward the same men who paid to have people killed?
Clara put her hands on his face. She held him there, her palms against his jaw, forcing him to look at her.
You found me in the dust, Caleb, bleeding, broken, half dead, and you didn't ride away. You knelt down and you helped me, even though helping me meant putting yourself in danger. Even though it meant bringing trouble to your doorstep. You did it because it was right. That's different. It's exactly the same. This ledger is the truth. And the truth doesn't do any good sitting in a strongbox or hidden under a church floor. It has to reach someone who'll act on it. And I'm the one who can carry it there.
Why you?
Because I'm a witness.
I survived Crow's attack. I can testify. The ledger alone is evidence. But evidence without a witness is just paper. The governor needs to hear what happened. He needs to see the face of someone who lived through it. That's me, Caleb. That's why it has to be me. He closed his eyes. His forehead rested against hers. She felt his breath on her face, warm and ragged. Come back to me, he said.
I will.
Promise.
I promise.
He kissed her, harder than before, desperate. The kiss of a man who understood that letting go was the bravest thing he'd ever do. Braver than riding into Crow's camp. Braver than standing in a mine shaft with a bullet in his side. Letting someone he loved walk into danger because it was right. Because she was right. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He let her see. I'll handle Avery, he said. I'll keep him here. I'll tell him the strongbox was empty, that Crow's men must have cleared it before Holt got there. I'll buy you 3 days. That's all I need. Holt appeared in the doorway. Horses are ready. Clara picked up the ledger. She wrapped it in oilcloth, tied it tight, and slid it into a saddlebag. She put on her new dress, the one Ruth had given her. She tucked the Derringer into her boot. She looked at Caleb one more time. When I come back, she said, I expect that cabin porch to be rebuilt. When you come back, I'll build you a whole damn house. She walked out. She didn't look back. Looking back was for people who weren't sure, and Clara Whitmore was sure. Sure of the road ahead, sure of the man behind her, sure of the weight in her saddlebag and the truth it carried. She and Holt rode hard. 3 days, across ridges and valleys, through summer heat that baked the trail to white dust. Clara's leg ached constantly. She ignored it. She'd learned to live alongside pain, not to conquer it, not to deny it, but to carry it the way you carry a heavy pack on a long march. You don't pretend it's light. You just keep walking. They reached Helena on the 3rd day. Clara walked into the territorial governor's office covered in dust, limping, sunburned, and carrying a saddlebag that held enough evidence to reshape Montana Territory. Governor Edmund Pierce was a compact man with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. He listened to Clara for 45 minutes without interrupting. She told him everything. The stagecoach, Crow, Caleb, the mine, the ledger, Avery's name in its pages. When she finished, Pierce opened the ledger and read for a long time. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the pages. "You're certain about Avery?" he asked. "The entries are in Crow's own hand. Dates, amounts, and specific services rendered. It's as certain as ink on paper gets." Pierce closed the ledger. He stood and walked to the window. "Miss Whitmore, I was appointed to this position because Washington believes Montana Territory is ready for statehood. But statehood requires order. It requires law. And it requires trust. The kind of trust that gets destroyed when the men wearing badges are the same men taking bribes." He turned to face her. "I'm going to act on this. Immediately. Avery will be arrested. Aldrich will be removed from the bench. Every name in this ledger will be investigated." "And Sheriff Mercer?" "Sheriff Mercer will be commended, formally, along with you, Miss Whitmore." Pierce paused. "You understand that you'll need to testify. In court. In front of the men this ledger exposes." "I've already testified with the Derringer, Governor. A courtroom won't scare me." Pierce looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "I believe that, ma'am. I absolutely believe that." Clara rode back to Bitter Creek in 2 days. She pushed the horse harder than she should have, harder than Holt wanted, harder than her body could reasonably sustain. But she didn't care. Every mile was a mile closer to the man who was waiting for her, and she was done being far away from the people she loved. She came into town at sunset. The main street was quiet. A few people on the boardwalk looked up as she rode past. Ruth stepped out of the general store and waved. The blacksmith tipped his hat. She tied her horse outside Prentice's office and walked in. Caleb was standing at the window, dressed, armed. His color was good. His eyes were clear. When she walked through the door, he turned, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, 5 feet apart, and looked at each other. "It's done," she said. "Pierce has the ledger. Avery will be arrested within the week. Every name in those pages." Caleb exhaled. A long, slow breath, the kind a man lets out when he finally sets down something he's been carrying for years. Not just the ledger, not just Crow, all of it. The letters that went unanswered, the warrants that were dismissed, the silence that followed his family's murder, the silence that told him nobody cared enough to act. Someone had acted. She was standing in front of him. "It's over," he said. "The fighting's over. The rest is just beginning." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest, and for the first time in weeks, in years maybe, she let go. The strength she'd held, the steadiness, the calm, it all came out in a single, shuddering breath that shook her whole body. "I'm tired, Caleb." "I know." "I'm tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being brave." "Then stop, right here, right now. You've been brave enough for a lifetime. Let somebody else carry it for a while." She looked up at him. "You? If you'll let me." "That goes both ways, Sheriff." "I know it does." 2 weeks later, they stood in the small wooden church in Bitter Creek. Clara wore a white dress that Ruth had ordered from Helena. Caleb wore a clean shirt and his badge. Holt stood as witness. Dawson and Levi sat in the front pew. Dr. Prentice sat in the back, pretending he wasn't crying. The pastor, a young man who'd arrived in town 3 months before and still looked startled by the size of the sky, read the words. Caleb said, "I do," in a voice that didn't waver. Clara said, "I do," in a voice that carried to the back of the church. When they kissed, Holt whistled. Dawson clapped. Levi nodded once, which from him was a standing ovation. Clara took the teaching position at the Bitter Creek School. 12 students. A one-room building with a wood stove and windows that stuck. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and, when the children asked, she taught them about the body. How bones heal. How blood carries life to every corner of a person. How the heart is just a muscle, but it's the strongest one we have. Caleb rebuilt the cabin, not just the porch, all of it. Bigger, stronger. A second room, a real kitchen, a front door wide enough for 2 people to walk through side by side. And beside that door he planted roses. Pink ones. He didn't explain why. Clara didn't ask. She already knew. The trial in Helena lasted 2 weeks. Clara testified on the 3rd day. She sat in the witness chair and faced a courtroom packed with territorial officials, newspapermen, and the families of people Crow had killed. She spoke for 3 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She told the truth, all of it, in every detail. And when she was finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Aldrich was removed. Deputy Marshal Cobb was arrested. Thomas Avery was stripped of his badge and sentenced to 12 years. 7 other men across 3 territories were indicted. Governor Pierce sent a letter to Caleb afterward. It read, "The territory of Montana owes a debt to you and your wife that cannot be repaid with commendations or rewards. What can be said is this: the system failed you. The people entrusted with justice betrayed that trust. But you did not stop fighting. And because of that, the system has a chance to become what it was always supposed to be." Caleb read the letter at the kitchen table. He folded it carefully and put it in the drawer beside the gold locket. 2 objects side by side, one that represented everything he'd lost, and one that represented what had come after. Months passed. The summer heat gave way to autumn. Leaves turned gold on the cottonwoods. Frost crept across the windows in the morning. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee and the lavender soap Clara ordered from a catalog. One evening in late October, Caleb came home from town to find Clara sitting on the porch. She had a blanket across her lap and a cup of tea in her hands, and a look on her face he'd never seen before. "What is it?" he asked, sitting down beside her. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Spring will bring more than flowers," she said. He went still. Perfectly, completely still. Like a man afraid that if he moved, the moment would shatter. "Clara, I saw Dr. Prentice this afternoon. He confirmed it." "Clara, say something other than my name, Caleb." He looked at her. His eyes were full. His throat worked. His hand pressed gently against her stomach, and she watched 3 years of grief and emptiness and silence crack open like ice on a river in spring, breaking apart, moving, letting something warm rush through for the first time. "I thought I was done," he said. His voice broke. He didn't try to fix it. "I thought that part of my life was over. That I'd had my chance and lost it, and that was the end." It wasn't the end. No. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them. No, it wasn't. He pulled her close. He held her against his chest, her head beneath his chin, and he cried. Not the way he'd cried during the fever, broken, delirious, lost in the past. He cried the way a man cries when the future, the one he'd stopped believing in, walks up and puts its hand in his. Clara held him. She pressed her ear against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, reliable. The same heartbeat she'd felt through his leather vest on the back of a bay horse, riding away from blood and dust toward something neither of them had dared to name. "Are you scared?" she asked. Terrified. "Good. Me too." He laughed. A real laugh. The first one she'd ever heard from him. Deep, rumbling, surprised. Like a sound he'd forgotten how to make and was startled to find it still could. "We're going to be terrible at this," he said. "We're going to be wonderful at this. We're going to argue about names and lose sleep and make every mistake there is to make. And it's going to be the best thing either of us has ever done." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Clara Mercer." "I love you, Caleb. I have since you knelt in the dust and told me that's why you were there." They sat on the porch as the sun went down. The Montana sky burned gold and red and violet, stretching out in every direction, impossibly wide, impossibly open. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The creek behind the cabin murmured over its stones. The pink roses beside the front door had gone dormant for winter, but their roots held firm beneath the soil, waiting for spring. The following April, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah. She had her father's eyes. Years passed. The schoolhouse grew. Bitter Creek grew. New families came. New buildings went up. The trail between Helena and Virginia City became safe enough for regular stagecoach service again, and people traveled it without fear, most of them never knowing why. But Clara knew, and Caleb knew. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, they'd sit together on the porch he'd built and watch the stars come out over the mountains, and neither of them had to say a word. Because some stories don't end with a final sentence. They end with a choice. The choice to stay, to build, to plant roses beside the door and teach children to read, and hold the hand of the person who found you bleeding in the dust and said, "That's why I'm here." Clara Whitmore crawled out of the wreckage of everything she'd known with a bullet in her leg and nothing in her hands but a borrowed revolver and the stubborn refusal to die. She built a life. She built it with a man who had lost everything and chose to love again. She built it in a territory that tried to break her and couldn't. And when her daughter, years later, asked her mother how the story began, Clara smiled and said, "It began with pain, and a stranger who knelt in the dust, and the hardest, simplest truth I've ever learned." "What truth, Mama?" Clara looked out at the wide Montana sky, at the roses blooming beside the door, at the man mending the fence who caught her eye and tipped his hat the way he'd done 1,000 times before. "That the road west begins with blood in the dust," she said, "and ends with someone choosing to stay."